So when we start digitally, one of the first things that you may want to do is do your widget or your logo icon for your phone screen. And I have step-by-step instructions for this in Blackboard. So if we kind of scroll down past your sketch information, your script, testing script, here's your icon widget instructions. So in this, you have, it really revolves around the, putting a couple of things in, putting your square in one layer, your logo in another layer. And we're doing this in Illustrator. This first part is really making the little square icon look more 3D or more realistic as it looks like on a phone. So when we're in Illustrator, we're actually going to just set this document up for print. And the reason that we are doing this in Illustrator, I just want you to understand the reason for this. If we were doing this in a real case scenario, we would want a vector version of our logo and we would want a raster version of our logo. Because our logo, that's the vector, we would use that for anything that our magazine logo would be printed on. Our magazine in general, if we did any other promotional materials for our magazine, like signage on buildings or, billboards, t-shirts, anything, any type of promotional material, we would have to have the vector version of that. We want the digital raster version for the UIUX project. So when we design this logo, we're going to export a PNG version, which is going to convert it to a raster-based image file, okay, without a background. It'll have a transparent background with the PNG. So I want you to understand the reason we're doing that. The first step is going to be, and we've got our, let me get my layer window back. Well, it's there. I just don't know where it is. There it is. Okay. So we're going to use the first layer for the square, okay, which is behind our logo. So the rectangle tool, I'll just use that. It doesn't matter what size you make it here, because when we change it to a PNG for our digital layout, we're going to scale it down to the size we need it. So not a big deal if it's bigger on this sheet of paper. But I want this to be a perfect square or equilateral. So I'm going to hold down the Option Shift keys. So when I drag it out, it's going to drag from the middle, and it's going to be a perfect square. And you can test that if I go back to the selection tool, or maybe not. It'll show my dimensions in a moment. But if I go back to my selection tool, I can then pull in my live corners and make it a rounded square here. So I also have my fill and stroke box. I'm going to turn the stroke off. I don't need an outline around it. I'm going to, for this example purposes, I'm just going to make this kind of a medium to light gray on the fill. Oops, not the stroke. Turn that off. Go to my fill swatches. And if you have a specific color, you can access your color picker on the fill box on the toolbar towards the bottom. If I double click on that, I get my color picker, and you can punch in your hexadecimal code for any swatches specifically that you're using for your brand. Okay. So I'm just going to color this in, and the other instructions on the sheet revolve around creating a gradient mesh, and that's going to allow this to look more three-dimensional. We're just basically going to add a little shadow around the edges to make it look like it's kind of popping out a little bit. So we're just making it look a little more realistic. So I'm going to select Object, Create Gradient Mesh. We're going to do 6 rows, 6 columns. So you can see when we put that in place, it's contoured to make it look a little more 3D. And from here, we're just going to select some of these dots along the edge. So I'm going to go to my Direct Select tool, And I'm just going to select like a little bit of the edge there. And you can see the dots that I select are still blue. The rest of them are hollow or white. And I'm going to go over here, and since I'm just using black and white, I'm just going to scale the black and white in my color window. You'll see it just a little bit darker. I'm not going to go, I don't want a dark line there. I want it just a little bit of, just a shade darker than what I have as the overall color. So I'm just going to make it a little darker. It's just to add a little bit of shadow there is the whole purpose. So I'm just going to repeat that on all four sides. I have it 46%, so I can either go back to my direct select tool. I'm going to select this side. I can either go and put in 46% here, or I can get my eyedropper and just eyedropper that same amount, or go back to where I made it darker on the other side. So I'm just going to repeat this process on all four sides. And you can see it getting darker. Oops. So now when we look at it, you can see it now, it looks a little more 3D there. So that's my first layer. So I'm just going to lock that. And then I'm going to add another layer. This is going to be my actual logo. Okay. So the reason we want this in two layers is because we may want a version of this, a PNG version of this without the square behind it. So we need the square for the widget or the phone screen where we're putting the widget in place. But if you want to use your logo in the actual screens and in the layouts, like on your feature article page where you have the logo at the top, you may not want the square behind it. So you can make that layer invisible where it's just showing your logo and export a PNG version of just your logo without the square. So we're doing that. We're putting this in two layers so you can have multiple versions of your logo, if that makes sense. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's really the gist of creating the widget. Once you get done with the logo on top, then you'll save it as an AI file, which is an Illustrator file. So you'll have an original editable file that you can go back to. And then we'll export as a PNG for the
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry. What did you say save it as the first time? Sorry.
an AI file, an Illustrator file.
Oh, okay.
So you'll save as first as an Illustrator, which is an AI. It'll have AI at the end of it. Okay. So that'll be an Illustrator file. So that's going to have all your layers. If you need to go back and edit your widget or your logo in any way, you can access the AI file. Okay. The PNG is going to flatten all your layers and it's an image file. You won't be able to access anything to edit it. So you want to have an original Illustrator file for editing purposes. And then we'll also export as a PNG. So this is changing it to a raster-based image file. The PNG will preserve a transparent background. So that's why we're using the PNG instead of a JPEG. If we use a JPEG, we're going to have all this white behind it. And we don't want that. We just want the square and the logo, right? So we want the PNG version. And then if you want another version, another PNG without the square and just your logo, then you'll make that square layer invisible and export another PNG with just the logo image that's transparent behind it. Everybody got that?
I have a question.
Okay.
I don't have that selection like toolbar stuff at the top. How can I get that?
Window control.
Okay, thank you.
And then toolbars also.
Okay.
If it's the left toolbar, if the control panel at the top is not visible, that's control. And your toolbar should be your basic toolbar here. See how it disappeared when I clicked on it? So you want the toolbar. If you have the advanced toolbar, you'll have the rounded rectangle. It'll provide you with more tools. including a rounded rectangle tool. So it's either way there. The basic is what it provides normally.
Thank you.
Yep. And so that's really the logo part. So I would do that first. And then once we're ready to start the InDesign document, I've already started a document here, but I'll show you the process. So when we start the InDesign document, here we're selecting mobile. And we're going to select the iPhone 876 Plus. This is with the Retina screen. And I would go ahead and I'm going to put sample here because I'm doing this repetitively today. But your normal phone screen, we're working in pixels again. Your normal phone screen is 1242 pixels wide by 2208 pixels long. And we may change that. I'm going to start out with 5 screens. You may need to use more than that or less. It just depends on your plan. If you want to add more of a grid to your layout, you can add columns. We're leaving the 36 pixels as our text margins inside the page. We don't technically need a bleed for this because this is not for print, but it just keeps it makes it easier to flush things off the edge. If we have like an image going to the edge of the page, it makes it easier. You know, sometimes it's not lined up right against the edge of the page, and so it leaves a white sliver when you make it into an image. So it just helps us eliminate that issue. So I'm creating a bleed to just kind of make that easier. So it'll kind of look like this. So I've got another sample where I've already got, let me undo these two because I've already started a sample here. So that first screen is going to be our phone screen with the widget in place. Here's the student example. I noticed, you know, quite a few people relied on the student example in their sketches, and I had to make corrections because, like I said, this student example they did a good job, but there are mistakes here. So by copying what they did, you made the same mistakes. So that's why I don't like posting student examples sometimes, because it's not perfect work and students tend to copy what they did, and usually there's still issues there. But this is kind of the phone screen here. I'm just using it as an example. The phone screen, we want the image of your phone screen. If you don't have an image, you're not going to have an easy time finding that on the web. You need to just screenshot your own phone if you have an iPhone. If you don't have an iPhone, you can get a friend to screenshot theirs, or, you know, somebody you know's got an iPhone, I know. So they just can screenshot their phone and give you that image. Just make sure there's some widgets in place, or you know, if in this case, we're just going to put the icon over one of these widgets. But we want that image to fit inside the text margin lines. So in this case, we kind of filled the background with black so that if it were a black phone, you can leave it off if you want a white phone, but it's going to show that color behind it. So we want to have the background color bleed off the page and then put the iPhone image on top of that. And it may not fit the whole height of the screen. So just make it balance. It's okay to have a little room above or below it. So now we've got the phone screen in place. I would go ahead and pull down some ruled lines to go ahead and line up. We're going to put your widget on top of this. So I'm going to pull down some guided lines from the ruler to line horizontally with the other widgets, and vertically. I've already put the vertical ones in place with the other widgets on the phone screen. And then I'm also going to pull down some guides for the label underneath. I'm going to align it with the X height. and the baseline. So we're going to have to also label underneath the phone. And I want you to make note of this. The typeface you use for underneath the widget will be either Helvetica or Arial. That'll match up. One of those typefaces, either one will match up to the X height of what's already on there. And I also would use my eyedropper tool and zoom in and document the color of that. Let me make sure I've got it selected so it's selecting the right one. Yeah. So just capture the color because it's not perfectly white. It's actually a light gray. So I would capture that and then create, once you capture it, you can create a swatch for it, which I did there. I'm just creating another swatch, but I've created a couple of swatches there for the color of the type there. So when you put the type underneath, you can make it that swatch color and match up to the other labels on the phone. And then from there, I would create a frame and just use the square shape that I created. And then you would place the widget like an image, your PNG version, place it in the frame like an image. So it would be somewhat like this. This is what he did here. So this is actually on top of the other widget. He just placed it and made it fit on top. And then you can see underneath, he labeled his modern rocker underneath that. So there we go. So that's the phone screen. The next screen, depending on if you have a loading screen or not, if you did a loading screen, you could put that on the second screen. Then it would be the home page, primary navigation, and then the home page with the drop-down menu. I think on several of your sketches, some of you had, short, concise, like in this case, he should have had a sub menu here. So today's articles, but if we click on that, what's our selection? You should have had a sub list here of the list of articles for us to choose from. So make sure you're being thorough there. So basically what he did was he copied and duplicated. So he clicked and dragged over all the elements on that screen, copied and pasted them onto a new screen, and then added the drop-down menu shape and the type on top of that. And then when we get ready to do the body copy, that's really what I wanted to demonstrate today. I'm not going through the whole layout with you because a lot of this stuff, you know how to place an image, you know how to make a text box and put text in a text box. But I want to show you the body copy and how to place continual type. That's the easiest way to go about this. So what I normally do, I've got the dog breed story here. So what I normally do is I go in and I'm still going to have to modify this type and edit it, not edit the copy, but I will have to apply the type treatment to all of this because it's copying all the breaker labels and everything. So I'm going to copy the article. I'm not copying the pull quote or the sidebar content, just the article itself, because you're supposed to lay out the whole article. I don't think I saw any sketches where anybody really did the whole article. So make sure you're planning on putting images within the article. I didn't see plans for that in many of the sketches. So you want pictures throughout the article. You want the pictures to help tell the story, okay? So make sure that you're doing that. So I've copied this. When we get ready to create our, let's say this is our feature story screen. Let me delete some of these because I've already, I made this a scrolling screen. So to make a scrolling screen, we'll use the page tool, which is the third tool in your toolbox. I'm going to turn off the liquid page rule so it's just scrolling the screen that I have selected. And then when I click and drag the screen, I'm going to hold the Option key. So I'm just going to drag it. It's going to look like you're dragging over the other screens, but when I let go, you'll see that it just made it longer. So at the top of these screens, you know, you may want to have your running bar. So like at the top of every screen, you may want he doesn't have a search, which he should have. But let's say you had your logo, the secondary menu icon, and then your search. You know, if I want that on every screen, then I can select all of those options. You know, I can just click and drag over all of them or select them individually using my Shift key and copy them to the next blank screen so that, you know, you can make that running bar the same on every screen. So some students like to do that initially. They'll create that running bar at the top with the menu, logo, and search. And that way, they've got that on top of every screen, or wherever we are in the app, we can access the secondary menu. We can click on the logo to get back to the home page, and we can access the search. You don't have to have the title of the article in the running bar. He just did that. But actually, it should be bigger than the deck, because right now we're looking at the deck and we think that's the title of the article. It's not. The title is up here, but that should be bigger and stronger in hierarchy than the deck. So let's say we have all that at the top. We've got a space for a running bar. We've got the main title. We've got an opening image. I'll go ahead and put a frame in place for that. Let's say we have our deck, our byline underneath that. So we're starting, let's say we're starting the body copy a little bit under that. So I'm going to create my first text box here. And I'm only going to run this text box a little ways because I'm going to show you a couple ways of going about this. So this way, I may put a picture underneath here after a little ways. So let's say I have an image that's going to go break up the copy a little bit. So I'm going to I'm going to paste the article. Well, I say I am. Maybe it didn't copy. Let me copy it again. So I'm double clicking inside this text box. There we go. So you can see the type is super small. It's tiny. So we want to modify that. So I'm going to select all. I'm just going to switch this to Avenir. And this is where your conversion chart comes into play. So your conversion chart, I attached it with that section for starting digitally because we're working in pixels, but InDesign still has the size of the type still in points. And that's where the conversion process has to happen because points, 1 point is not equal to 1 pixel. It's a different ratio for this Retina screen. So with the conversion chart, the biggest thing to remember here is whatever it says for that part of the structure in pixels, you're going to at least double it in points. So this is paragraph or body copy. He recommends the type size be 16 pixels. So we're going to make this at least 32 points. So I'm just going to change this. I'm going to make it 34 to be safe. So you can see this is much more proportional and easy to read. It's not so small. And I'm going to, you know, I'm not editing the story at all, but I am creating the type treatment for all of this. I'm going to take the hyphenation off. I'm going to maybe adjust the leading. You know, where there's breakers, you're going to make the side, you know, make the, I thought I added another picture frame in there somewhere, but I guess I haven't. you'll have some areas, like if I extend it, you know, this is the whole article, so this is not fitting in the text box that I created. But like where you have breakers, those labels, you'll take those out. That means there's a subheader there, so I may make that bold and bigger. So you will have to adjust the type treatment throughout the story and the body copy. But we have a continual text box here. So let's say I want to create a frame and a picture before I start that new section of the story. So I may add another frame here and an image. And then when I get ready to continue this, I will click the plus sign and continue the story underneath it. I'm going to give myself a little room. Actually, that's the end of my scrolling screen. So let me start it on the next page. So wherever I click, you know, as long as I have this plus sign, that means there's more copy in there than what's fitting in the screen. So if I want it to continue through the whole, you know, obviously a whole scrolling screen of copy is going to be boring. So I want to add some images here and there to break up the monotony. Then I would go back to my selection tool, click on the plus sign, continue the copy underneath that. So it's still continuing, you know, you will probably have for most of these, for any of these sample stories, you may have multiple scrolling screens. So I would include some space at the bottom so that you can have arrows or indicators on how to navigate to the next screen. So obviously I have more of this article that will go on this next screen here and so on. Is this making sense to everybody what I'm doing right now?
Yes.
Okay. You can see I'm still not quite finished here. It's still going. So I'm just continuing it.
I just noticed it's going to be tedious with my trackpad on my laptop. I should have got a mouse.
I mean, I'm using a trackpad right now. I'm not using a mouse. But it can be if you're scrolling a lot, you know. But the reason we want the continual text box is because if I double click in any of these boxes and I select all the type to edit, it's selecting every bit of type in every continual box that I created. So I'm only editing it once. So if I adjust the size, it's going to adjust the size everywhere. If I adjust the leading, it's going to adjust it everywhere. So that's the reason that it's going to simplify the process. You know, students ignore my instructions on this every semester and they do it the hard way, and it leads to a world of frustration because otherwise you're creating a text box, copying and pasting that a section of the story in that text box, then creating a new text box, selecting the next section and putting it in that. Then you're editing all of those individual boxes, you know, separately. You're having to edit them all separately. If you do it this way, if I have to make any modifications, for instance, let's say where this image is right here, you can see this sentence that's under the image belongs with this paragraph up here. So if I had this in separate boxes, I would have to cut this out, paste it in this one, you know, and restructure everything. Here, all I have to do is just lengthen this part of the box and it'll bump back up and it'll adjust all the other text accordingly. You know, it's just much easier to make little edits that way. Notice I'm leaving space above and below the image, more space at the bottom for a caption if I need to include captions. And, you know, captions would be the smallest type, so at least 24 points. So little things like that are going to be a lot easier, you know, so that's one way to create the continual box. Another way that I can do this is if I could, let me backtrack a little bit to show you the other way. If you're not sure where you want to put your images yet, you can just go ahead and make the whole article. I'm still leaving room at the bottom because I'm still going to require multiple scrolling pages here. Again, I'm leaving room at the top for the running bar and things like that. Okay, so let's say that I just make this continual here. And I decide to put my image, let's say I decide to put it, well, that's not even the beginning of the story, but let's say I want to break up some of this section. Here's another breaker right here. So I'm going to take that label off. Here's a subheader. I made that black and made it bigger. I'm not sure. I think this one was 42 points for that subheader. So make sure you're consistent. And so the leading underneath that, there's a space. So I'll just add a space there for this, which I would probably make that a little tighter. So make sure your spacing for the same parts of the structure is consistent. Remember your fundamentals there. But let's say I wanted to put an image somewhere in this section between these breakers. So I could put the frame in place. It looks like it's going over the image. But in this strategy, I'm just wrapping the text box or wrapping the copy around the text box. So I would select the frame of the image, and I'm going to go and make my text wrap window open. And you've got your different text box or text wraps here at the top. I want to wrap around a bounding box of my image here. So when I click that, it's automatically breaking around that image. I also want to add a border. Notice the copy's right up against the edge, and I don't want that. I want I want space around this image. So that adds me a little border around this, and it makes the type bump around it. So I want to place this image before this breaker. So if I move this image down, the text is automatically going to wrap around it. Do you see how that works? Y'all still with me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
And if you need more room underneath for a caption, you can click the little link button and just add more space below the image. You'll see your border get bigger. So if you need to add more space for a caption, you can do that. So let's say I wanted to put a caption here, and I did another text box. I'm gonna make it 28 points just to make it big enough here. I'm just writing the word caption. So let's say I put it underneath this image. Well, you see nothing shows up. It's trying to wrap that text too, okay? So what I will do in this situation is I'm gonna go up to Object, Text Frame Options, and click to ignore text wrap. So that way, that text box that I put on top of that image, well, it's not on top of the image, but it's on top of that border area that I created. It's gonna allow me to see, it's not wrapping that text of the caption, okay? So if that happens to you, that's what you can do. So that's a second way you can go about this. You can put in all the copy in one continual text box and then put the frames and the images, you can place them wherever you want and just wrap the text around them. It's going to make the text jump accordingly when you do that. It's going to adjust the text in every continual box that you have. So it added more text down here in this box in this next screen. So I would have to extend this and make it work. Which that would probably be a scrolling screen as well, because there's only a little bit left of this article here. So I could always check this make this screen a little longer. Oh, I clicked the wrong shortcut key. Sorry, guys. Option. Make that a little longer, and then I could just extend this and fit all the article and do away with this text box down here. So once you have your body copy in place, really it's just a matter of inserting, you know, you want your pull quotes, and in this case, he did the same thing. So he created a color block, and you can see the border around it where he text wrapped that. So the text is wrapping around the colored box. And then he added the text box of the pull quote on top of that. And the double quote or the quotation marks are in their own text box because he made those bigger. He did the same thing with the link to the sidebar. So you can see the border around that. You know, if we didn't have that border, you can see the type would be right up against the edge. We don't want that. We want a nice border around the type everywhere we go. Same on the inside, you know, notice that there's space around the text inside a colored box. You don't want the type going all the way to the edge and meeting right up against the edge. You want a nice border. Notice around the pull quote, there's plenty of room around the type, okay? But you can text wrap you know, you want space above and below colored boxes around images. You want space around it. So that's really important to remember. So you only are required to have one pull quote and one sidebar. I think the dog breed article gives you a choice of pull quotes, but you only have one sidebar content. I think the Italy story gives you a couple of sidebar choices, the packing list or the do's and don'ts. So you would link to the sidebar from the article, and the sidebar more than likely has its own screen. And then you'll want to way back to the story. The logo would be back to the home page. You might want to include the secondary navigation and a search on the sidebar screen as well. So that's the gist of it. You know, just be aware in the body copy with the type treatment, you know, be aware of widows, be aware of how the copy is breaking up from page to page. Make sure the flow of the read is working. You don't want to break up the copy with an image that is, like, for instance, if I were to have this image and caption where it was, you know, like say the breaker and one sentence, you know, were above the image, that would be awkward. You know, you want it to be placed in a way that it's not breaking up the story in an awkward way. Is that making sense with everybody? Is everybody grasping what I'm going over?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Are there any questions about what I just went over? If you don't see your windows on the right, like the text wrap window, again, it's under window, text wrap. But you also have it in the control panel up here. You have those icons. It's not labeled, but I think if you hover over it, it'll tell you what it means. So that's really where we are right now. You know, like I said, your strategy and how you get started is really up to you. You can do it the first way I showed you, where you do a little bit of the body copy, and if you know where your images are, where you want them to be in the story, you can kind of break it up that way, or you can lay out the whole story in continual boxes and then place the images and wrap them. that might be easier depending. But in some ways, you know, you can make the process efficient. Like I said, with the running bars at the top of the screens, you can select those components and copy and paste them onto every screen. So they're the type treatment, you know, it's the same, you know, there's consistency, because you don't want different alignments on every screen with the same information. You want it consistent. So these, so that's going to be important, you know. Just think about your fundamentals. You want a lot strong alignments. You want consistency with the same parts of the structure. You want consistency in your spacing between paragraphs. You want all of that in place. So that's really, you know, the start of the digital process. And y'all are welcome to, you know, practice while we're sitting here, you know, use a sample document and just kind of practice placing the copy or starting a document in InDesign. You know, you're welcome to kind of play around with it in case you have questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording just because that was the main part that everybody needed to see.